Let's take a look at another passage from Lewis. What was the sense in saying the enemy were in the wrong unless right is a real thing, which the Nazis at bottom knew as well as we did and ought to have practiced? If they had had no notion of what we mean by right, then, though we might still have to fight them, we could no more have blamed them for that than the color of their hair. Okay, so what Lewis is saying here is this, is that if it's the case that what we mean by moral obligation and moral prohibition are just these culturally, socially determined and arbitrarily chosen rules that we expect people in our in-group to adhere to, if that's what these notions of moral obligation and permission are, and the Nazis didn't have any particular ideas about what our particular notions of moral obligation and permission were, if they didn't have knowledge of these things, then how could we blame them for what they did? Okay, so if these ideas about moral prohibitions and obligations exist only contextually within a particular culture or within a particular society, and another society doesn't have any knowledge of this other society's moral codes, then how can we blame them when they don't do what we would expect them to do were they aware of those notions of right and wrong that existed in this other culture? Now, of course, what Lewis is sort of pointing at here is something very interesting, and that is that the Nazis tried to hide from the world what they were doing. Okay? The Nazis tried to hide from the world what they were doing. Why? Well, because they knew what they were doing on some level was wrong. And even though in Nazi society, in German society during World War II, laws were passed that said anything the Nazis do is legally permissible, they recognized at the same time that the rest of the world, the rest of humanity, was going to deeply frown on what they were doing. And what Lewis is saying is they did know what is morally prohibited, what is morally obligated. That's why they tried to hide what they were doing. They knew they were doing the wrong thing, and they didn't want that to be found out by the rest of the world. And what Lewis is saying here is that this is yet more evidence that not only is it necessary to treat moral obligation and moral permission as real things, but that there's evidence to believe that even in the most heinous of societies, they know what these natural laws of human beings are as well, even when they choose to ignore them.